I want to say to you now, I'm extremely honored to stand here and to introduce to you our speaker for today. Dr. Joel Jenkins is a man who just happens to have a Bronze Star for his service in Iraq. Beyond that, he's also retired as a U.S. Army chaplain. He'll tell you about some of his service today. He's married to his lovely wife, Donna, who's able to be here and join him today as well. He's also the former pastor of the First Baptist Church of Charlottesville, Virginia, which is pretty special because that is Lottie Moon's home church. So, all these years we've been trying to get Lottie Moon paid off, and we hadn't yet. But we want to encourage you as we come to the Christmas season, be praying and thinking about the gift that you would set aside for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, because every single dime of that goes to the cause of international missions. So please be praying about that. And please join me now in welcoming Dr. Joel Jenkins to the platform at this time.
Thank you, my brother.
God bless you, brother.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. I don't think it's just me, but I felt something during that last rendition that took me back to right after 9/11, when our nation, for at least a while, we seemed to put aside all of our differences, and it was like the old story of the two brothers that used to fight each other all the time, but if you fought one of them, then you had to fight both of them. So there was a spirit here this morning of patriotism, a spirit here this morning of acknowledging that all good gifts come from the Father of lights above, and that those who serve our country in many respects, whether they know it or not, since God is the one who establishes kingdoms, they're serving Him. But it was wonderful to see so many veterans present in the service this morning. We are blessed today in so many ways, my wife Donna and I, because we have two of our good friends from Charlottesville who have moved to Knoxville. John and Jackie, thank you for coming to the service today. They're West Knoxville folks. They're Westerners. But they came over to be with us today, and we thank you so much. They were friends of ours in Charlottesville, still are our friends, and we hope to get them back to visit soon. And then beside my wife Donna is Gigi Taylor. Many of you know Gigi. Yeah. Well, we love Gigi too. Gigi, I was her pastor for 7 years, back when her husband John and their children were teenagers, and our children were teenagers, and I was pastoring First Baptist Salisbury, North Carolina, and John and Gigi were very much involved in our church, and they were both very much involved in the missions focus of our church. Gigi led mission teams herself to Togo through North Carolina Baptist Partnerships, and I remember those mission efforts, among other things, was to dig wells so that the people of Togo would have pure drinking water, healthy drinking water. But it was also done so that they might know that water of life that gives life. And so it was done not just to provide a temporary relief from thirst, but to help provide that eternal satisfaction of spiritual thirst. And so we appreciate her. She was helped us with so many of our ministries, including our sign ministry. Her husband, John, was also involved in missions, and John and I made a mission trip together to Poland. We helped work on a seminary just outside of Warsaw, a Baptist seminary. So we have so many wonderful memories with Gigi and her family. She came down when I spoke at First Baptist Salisbury last year for a Veterans Day event. She came down and asked me then, would I be interested in coming up to Tennessee? And so it worked out, and I just appreciate Gigi making that contact, and then Todd, thank you and your church. You folks have been so gracious from day one. You've taken great care of us, and we just thank you very much, my brother. And something that I didn't know in the early service, but I made a I made a snide remark about the Navy a while ago. I mean, I'm Army. And, I said, you can tell a Navy guy, you just can't tell him much. I take that back because the pastor told me his son's in the Navy. He's on a nuclear submarine. I mean, he may be targeting my house after a while. So please tell Tanner I didn't mean it. But I do want us to pray for Tanner. He's having some surgery tomorrow, but he's serving our country in the Navy, particularly on a nuclear submarine. It takes a special person to be a submariner. I'm just telling you. I have too much claustrophobia to think I'm going to get in one of those and stay underwater for months at a time. So we're so grateful for those folks just like your son who's willing to put their life, put their country's life ahead of their own. And it just blesses me to know that y'all's son is out there serving that way. And I know many of you maybe have a son or a grandson or a granddaughter or some family member that's serving. Donna and I, we are both children of World War II veterans. Her dad was in the first wave of D-Day, Normandy. Fortunately for her family, he was in the 4th Infantry Division and not the 1st or the 29th. And his regiment landed up at Utah Beach, where there were only 200 casualties. Well, down at Omaha, there were 5,000. And many of those were Virginia National Guard folks. Right in Charlottesville, we have an armory there, and K Company was the number of that company headquartered at that time. And the armory there is named after a gentleman who won the Medal of Honor. And so we honor Mr. Paragore, and we think of him often because of his giving his life, but he saved many lives. And so he won the Medal of Honor, and he was a Charlottesville young man. But thank you again, Black Oak Heights, for having this service. I can assure you there are many groups around this nation, including many churches, that will have no mention of Veterans Day today. You can go to a Veterans Day event in a lot of places and there'll be a small number of people there. You can go to a Memorial Day event and there'll be a small number of people there. Matter of fact, many of the people that do attend are veterans or their families. But thankfully, there are many Americans like we have gathered in this sanctuary today. You may not have had a family member serve, but you care and you realize the importance of honoring those who have and those who do. And so I just want to commend you for that. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today. The pastor mentioned a book that I've written. You can pick one up over here if you'd like. I'd like to give them away, but when I wrote this book, I didn't have a bunch of folks saying, would you write a book and let us pay you to write it? No, I had to pay them to let me write it. But I thought it was worth it. So to recoup my expenses, I've asked for a donation over there if you want one. I've already put an inscription in all of them, God Bless America, Colonel Joel Jenkins. But if you'd like for me to write it to someone, I'll be over there. But thank you again, Todd, for mentioning that, and thank you for letting me be with y'all. I'm going to be using the Gospel of Mark as my text, the 6th chapter. There was such a wonderful spirit in this place today, such enthusiasm for the Lord being with us and honoring Him. Reminded me of my dad, who was a pastor years ago. We would be in a service and it would be just wonderful music and everything. Everybody felt so blessed. And I remember my dad saying on a number of occasions, we could go home right now and we've been blessed. But we never did. So we stayed around, to hear him speak. We could have gone home, but we never did. So we won't go quite yet either. We could, but I just want to thank you again for the privilege of being here representing Veterans Day. I am a veteran, of course, 27 years. The Lord was with me through those years, and I had the support of my wife. I didn't go into the service until I was 34, no prior service. And I was pastoring a church in North Carolina over in the Kings Mountain area. And several of our church members were in an engineer battalion, a National Guard, North Carolina National Guard Engineer Battalion, and they hadn't had a chaplain in that unit in years. They couldn't get one. So quite a few of my church members came to me and said, Pastor, we really would like for you to consider coming into the National Guard, and you can pastor our church and you can be the chaplain for our Guard unit. I gave every excuse I could. I said, well, I'm probably too old. I'm almost 35. And no, we've checked. You're still good. And I said, well, you know, the church didn't, when I came here, they really didn't know they were calling a member in the reserve. They said, that's all right. We've checked with the deacons. They think it's a great idea. I mean, every excuse I gave, it was like, no, we've already crossed that. So Don and I prayed about it. And I did pursue that, and was sworn into the North Carolina National Guard 1 month before my 35th birthday, which would have made me too old back at that point. Now you can come in later. But God was involved in that. And so part of my military career was in the National Guard and in the Army Reserves, and 10 years on active duty, including time at the Pentagon, in Iraq. And the last 3.5 years of my chaplaincy, Donna and I were at Fort Bragg, where I was the rear detachment chaplain for the 82nd Airborne for 3.5 years while the division was deployed twice. And during that intensive time, it became my responsibility to conduct memorial services and funerals for over 250 paratroopers. I was the senior chaplain in the rear, and so whenever we would lose soldiers, paratroopers in Iraq and Afghanistan, we would do a collective monthly memorial service, but we also would travel to wherever these paratroopers were from to do funerals at their home base. And I was supposed to be assigning chaplains, but sometimes we would have mass casualty incidents, and I would send out all 7 of my subordinate chaplains to accompany burial teams, and then I would also need to accompany a team. So I traveled personally to over a dozen states, and from California up the Northeast and Florida and all in between. And it was a high honor because the 82nd's motto was, we bury our own. So they would always send a full burial detail, including a chaplain, including a trumpeter for taps. And then we would go and we would support the family and for the funeral service and the burial. So it's been a high calling for me. You know, that passage that's over in John where Jesus said, no greater love than this, that a man would lay down his life for his friends. Well, I saw that fulfilled literally dozens of times in the military family. Many of those paratroopers that I would preside over their funeral had given their life. I remember one young lieutenant, he'd just gotten out of West Point. He was a second lieutenant, and he died in Afghanistan, and he was credited with saving 20 lives because of the way a certain incident unfolded with an IED. And anyway, I saw that a number of times where young men would give their life for their brother, or we had female paratroopers as well, or so their brother or their sister that was serving. So I've been around so many that have inspired me that I assure you I will never take for granted our liberties because they have been paid for with a heavy price. Yes. And I think here today you folks understand that. I have to tell you at least one humorous story before I get into the serious stuff. Matter of fact, I may tell you 2 humorous things. I was speaking at the early service, and I was reminded of the fella who got up to speak, and he was just so full of everything he wanted to say that he said to the audience, he said, I've got so much to say, I don't know where to begin. And somebody in the back said, well, why don't you begin somewhere near the end? So I won't quite begin near the end, but I will move it along. But at Fort Bragg, I heard the story of this young private who had finished his basic and finished his advanced training, and he had become a wheel mechanic. He was good at it back home, and so the Army said, that's where we need to put you. So they made him a mechanic, and they sent him to Fort Bragg. It's Fort Liberty now, but they sent him to then Fort Bragg, And they told him, they said, here's your orders. You show up to a certain motor pool and give the master sergeant your orders and tell him you've been assigned to that motor pool. He said, oh, that's great. So he shows up, young private, goes to the motor pool, meets the master sergeant who was in charge of that motor pool, and he said, Sarge, he said, here's my orders. I've been assigned to this motor pool. And the master sergeant was elated because they were overworked. He was short of mechanics. Fort Bragg is a high-tempo place. They tear up a lot of equipment in training. They drop it out of airplanes. They drive over stumps in the woods. And so that motor pool really was kind of overwhelmed. So the master sergeant was thrilled to death. So he told the young private, he said, look here, son. He said, I have worked my team so hard. Since you're here today, I'm going to take them all to a long lunch. And he said, all you got to do is answer the phone. Can you do that? And the private, Sarge, can I answer the phone? I got it. He said, okay, all you got to do is answer the phone and take a message, and we'll be back after lunch. Private said, got it, Sarge. No longer had the master sergeant and the rest of the guys left the building that the phone rings. The voice on the phone said, I want to know if General Smith's Humvee is ready to ride. Well, that young private had had a tour of the building. He had seen that Humvee. Somebody had run it over a stump. They'd broken an axle. The transmission was gone. And no, it wasn't ready. So he speaks to the voice on the phone. He said, did you ask if General Smith's Humvee's ready to ride? And the voice said, yes. He said, you must be the most ignorant man on Fort Bragg. He said, somebody's torn up government property. No, it's not ready to ride. You are so dumb to ask. The voice on the phone said, do you know who this is? Private said, no. He said, this is General Smith. The private said, do you know who this is? The general said, no. He said, good. Now, Todd, I don't write my own jokes. So when they start writing better jokes, I'll start telling better jokes. Yeah. All right, I do want to get into our text. And to set the stage for this, I just remind us of a couple of things on Veterans Day. Every generation of Americans, even pre-Revolutionary War, we have had some of our fellow citizens step up to defend the vision of America and later the purpose of America. And we know it's with a heavy cost. We know many have not only lost their lives, but many have been, their bodies have been misshapen. They have lost limbs. Our own son-in-law, Don and I, our son-in-law had 2 tours in Iraq, and he was wounded in his second tour. He has a Purple Heart, still carries shrapnel around. And we know how close he came to losing his life. The young man that was beside him on this Buffalo, this big equipment to clear IEDs, they were hit with an RPG. The young man beside him was killed. That young man was from Columbia, South Carolina. His dad was a Baptist preacher in Columbia. Well, that young man didn't get to come home. Fortunately for us, our son-in-law did come home. And he and my daughter live next door to us. We have 2 beautiful grandsons. They don't want me to call them beautiful, but they're beautiful to me. Very handsome grandsons. And our son-in-law was one of those who answered the call and literally came very close to not returning home. 1.3 million of our fellow Americans have died in serving America in our military over our history, 1.3 million. That sounds like a lot of people, but when you stop and think about it, today we have over 350 million people that are citizens in America. And then you add all the previous generations, we have well over 500 million people easily that have lived in America's freedom and liberty. And yet a small number, really, a small number, 1.3 million, gave their lives so that the rest of us could enjoy what we enjoy, including worshiping freely, freedom of speech. Yes, America has a lot of problems. And we see what's going on in some parts of our country with thousands of people Many of them risking their lives to do what? To get into America. I don't see too many lines of people trying to get out. We have something that is so unique, that is so powerful, that there's never been a civilization in the history of the world to come close to what we have in America. And yet many of our young people, and it's not their fault, but many of our young people are not being told the stories of the sacrifices, even of the veterans. And so they don't realize what they have every day is something that we just take for granted. Not thinking that those 18, 19-year-olds that died at D-Day, or those 18, 19-year-olds that died in the Pacific, or died at World War I, or in all of our conflicts, those 18 and 19-year-olds who gave their lives, not only did they give their life, they gave their future. They gave their hopes, they gave their dreams. Many of them had dreamed to have a family someday, but they never came home. I've toured the American Cemetery in Viverville, France. It's the Normandy Cemetery for American soldiers. We have almost 10,000 buried there, and I've walked that ground just reading the headstones, and you see the states that these come from that are buried there, and it's every single state, including some of the areas that are not states, like Puerto Rico. Many are from those places like U.S. Virgin Islands or Guam or other places where they volunteer and they come and they serve and they die. And so I've walked the grounds of many cemeteries. I've done burials at Arlington. I've done burials in little church cemeteries up in northern Indiana and Illinois and various places where we've taken the one. And that's the thing about the American military and I know other countries do as well, but not to the way America does it. Our motto is, we will leave no man behind. And we have so many females in our military that we will leave no female behind that's serving. And many of our veterans have died just simply to try to get their brother back. I know friends of mine that served in Vietnam have told me stories of their time there, and I saw this in Iraq as well, that if there's a wounded someone, one of our veterans, or not veterans at that point, but one of our service members, others will die to try to get to them. And sometimes they'll die just to get their body back because they believe it's important enough to honor that pledge. I'll not leave you. I won't leave you behind. And so we have something special that our veterans have represented in our nation's legacy and history. And the least we can do is what you've done today. And I really want to commend you for it. Because you've got a lot of veterans in your church, and I know now they feel remembered. They feel appreciated because of what you've chosen to do today. Your music was just marvelous. Your pastor has been so encouraging. And their family, they know what it costs. They know what it costs to have a loved one not at the kitchen table at Christmas because he's under the water somewhere protecting America. A lot of folks, a lot of families have paid a heavy price, and the least we can do is do what we've tried to do today, to remember them and honor them. Let me give you just a couple of thoughts here from Mark 6. I'm going to have to task you with reading this at home and doing your own homework, but I want to point out a couple of things. This is the passage where we're going to be looking at it briefly. It's where Jesus had, prior to this, he had tried to get his disciples a little R&R. You know, we know that term in the military, and it's important. I got to come home from Iraq for 2 weeks. It went by just like that, but it really meant a lot to me to get to come home for a little while and be with the family before I went back for the second half of my tour. But I'm glad our country tries to support that sort of thing. But Jesus was trying to do that for his disciples. Prior to where we're going to read is prior to the feeding of the 5,000, and his disciples were already worn out. If you read the background text, the crowds had not relented. They had just wanted to be around Jesus. They knew something was different about him. They could tell, and they were drawn to him. Not just for the healings, but the word that he brought, the power that was in that word. And so Jesus had tried to get his disciples a little break. Well, they were sailing around the Sea of Galilee to get away from the crowd. Well, the crowd followed them. I was talking to John and Jackie earlier. Our friends have been to Israel a couple of times. Donna and I have led groups to Israel. I love Israel. I love the many places, but the Sea of Galilee, by the way, we need to pray for Israel. But the Sea of Galilee area, I love it. And I've seen what this looks like. The Sea of Galilee is not a huge body of water. It's 12 miles at its longest, and it's 7 miles, maybe 7.5 at its widest. That's not a big body of water. You got a whole lot of bigger lakes in Tennessee than that. But I want to tell you something. It's a dangerous body of water when the wind comes up because of the topography. On the northern end, you've got mountains like Mount Hermon, and you're going from 10,000 feet down all the way down to Jericho, which is below sea level, the lowest inhabited city on the face of the earth. Well, the Sea of Galilee is in the middle of all of that. So the winds rage in, the water gets turned over. Many people have drowned in the Sea of Galilee, many fishermen. And so the disciples knew you can't take the Sea of Galilee for granted. Well, after the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus said, I need to try this again, guys. I need to get you a break. I thought I was going to get it done, but now I just made it worse. You had to serve these thousands. So this time, Jesus said, you guys get in the boat. You go to the other side. You go back over the other side to Bethsaida. I'll meet you there. And I'll hold the crowd here. So that's what was happening. Verse 45. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, to Bethsaida, while he sent the multitude away. And when he had sent them away, he departed to the mountain to pray. Now, when evening came, listen to this. I got to show more respect to the Navy, man. And when the evening came, the boat was in the middle of the sea. That meant 3.5 miles to the closest shore. Jesus was alone on the land. Then he saw them straining at rowing, for the wind was against them. Straining at the oars, for the wind was against them. Now let's just hold on to that a second. Jesus had given them one mission. Now later on he would give them other missions, like reaching the world with the gospel. But here he'd given them one mission: go to the other side and wait. One mission: go to the other side and wait. Now, prior to the resurrection, the disciples got it wrong often. They just misunderstood. They wanted to have political authority. You know, they wanted to be on the right hand of the kingdom and the left hand, all this stuff. But here they got it right. They had one mission. And where do we find them? In the fourth watch of the night, the text says, which is that darkest 3-hour period before morning. In the middle of the storm, they were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, battling the wind, battling the storm to do what? To get to the other side. I really see a microcosm here of life, of really of the world right now. They could have gone with the flow, and it would have put them right back where they started. You know, in society and culture, if we follow culture and we follow society, I can assure you right now we're not going to end up in the right place. We can already see it. We see the trends. Well, if we're going to be obedient to God, even the 10 Commandments, as just the minimum, if you look at this, we're going to be straining at the oars too. If we're going to do the right thing, if we're going to do that which pleases God, quite often we're going against the grain. We're going against the wind. We're going against the culture. If we hold to those standards that the Lord has given us, so we can identify with this. They were straining at the oars. I mean, these guys were fishermen. They knew how to move around in the Sea of Galilee, but it wasn't happening. They couldn't put a sail up. It would have put them even faster back the other way. So they were straining at the oars. And about the fourth watch of the night, he, Jesus, came to them. He never let them out of his sight. I just love that image because it reminds me of how the Lord wants to relate to you and to me. The same Lord that physically had a presence with them when he was getting ready to ascend, he told them, he said, it's going to be better for you that I go. Now, I would probably say I would be a little slow like they were to say, now how can that be better? You're going to leave us. And he said, it's better for you that I go because I'm going to send another. And that's the Holy Spirit. So what Jesus was basically saying is, physically, I can only be in one place at a time. But once I go physically, I'm coming back. And I'm going to be fully present in the Spirit. So I don't have to just be on the Sea of Galilee where people are struggling. I can be in China, or I can be in Africa, or I can be in the U.S., where any one of my creation are that seek me and walk with me, I'll be there. I'll be there. And the Lord wants that kind of relationship with you and with me. He wants us to know He's walking with us. He's got His mind on us. He's got His heart on us. He was focused on these disciples. And He was intent. Why? Because it's God's reputation that's at stake. When we commit our lives to Christ, then the Lord promises us some things. It's God's reputation what happens to me and to you once I commit my life to Him. That doesn't mean it's going to be an easy life, but it means from then on, God's grace is always going to be enough. I heard the story years ago of a woman who, she was a single mother with 3 children, and she was really struggling. She had a lot of things going on, and she went to see her medical doctor, and the doctor said, you're just depressed. I want you to go see a psychiatrist. Let's start there. She said, I'll do anything. So she went to see the psychiatrist. She went in for the first appointment. Psychiatrist said, okay, I see on your chart, you're single, you have 3 children. If I'm going to help you, you got to be truthful to me. I'm going to ask you one question. Which one of your 3 children do you love the most? She was taken aback. What kind of question is that? I love them all the same. Well, the psychiatrist said, that's not possible. You're not being honest. So I can't help you till you answer that question. And he pressed her. She finally said, okay, I'm going to tell you which one of my children I love the most. He said, now we're getting somewhere. She said, the child of mine that I love the most is the one that needs me the most on any given day. I love that. Which one of God's children does He love the most? Well, I can tell you which one He gives the most grace to on a given day. The one who needs more. So we serve a God, we serve a Lord, we serve a Savior, we serve one that the Apostle Paul said He's a friend that sticketh closer than a brother. Why would anyone want to live their life in this world and not experience that presence when it's offered? I can assure you, when Jesus Christ is in your life, you're not going to be less off. You're not going to be worse for that. You're going to reach your reason for being, your potential. Why you're created in the first place. We're created to be in His image. We're created to be like Him. We're created to have fellowship with Him. And so I just love this passage where Jesus went to the disciples. They didn't know it. Many times in my life, especially when I was in Iraq, sometimes I'd think about it, sometimes I didn't. But when I thought about it, it gave me peace to know I'm in the Lord's sight. He knows where I am. He's watching over me. He's got this. Something happens to me, it's to His glory. If I get home, it's to His glory. He's watching over me. And so Jesus was watching over His disciples. And right in the darkest of the night, in the middle of the storm, He starts walking on the water, just so He could keep an eye on them. And the text says He was going to walk around them. I think He was going to let them fulfill this mission and then be on the other side and say, I knew you could do it. But they saw Him. Probably a flash of lightning, and all of a sudden they see this figure walking on the water. They thought it was a ghost. That made them even more terrified. There's not another Greek word for more scared than they were. And what does Jesus do? Once they saw Him, and they were overwhelmed and they were terrified, immediately, He didn't wait. He didn't say, let me just let them squirm a little bit. No. Immediately, He talked with them and said to them, and that's why I love the Bibles that I use. I always have to have one with red letter in it. I just always like to look and see the words of Jesus. Oh, that's Jesus right there. Well, there's not a lot of red in this 6th chapter after verse 45. This is there. This is there. Immediately, Jesus spoke to them, and this is all he said. Real simple. Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid. Now, I can tell you to be of good cheer when you're facing calamity, but I'm not sure I can back it up. I can say, oh, just be positive. And you can say, I've been positive. That didn't get me anywhere. Still can't pay my bills. I can't back it up when I tell someone, just be of good cheer. Now, I can help them, hopefully, in some way. But when Jesus says be of good cheer, he can back it up. When he says be of good cheer, it means be of good cheer. Don't fret this. Don't fear this. He said, be of good cheer. In other words, let your heart, let your burden be lifted. Let your fear be removed. Why? Very simple. He said, because I'm here and I'm enough. Old Vance Havner, one of our old North Carolina mountain philosophers, pastors, used to say, not only is Jesus necessary, but Jesus is enough. He said, be not afraid. I'm here. Don't be afraid. Now, let me close my message with this. I think there's a lot of applications here, but I'm going to give you one. I don't know, obviously I don't know, because I don't know many of you. I know a few. So I don't know where you are. I don't know where you're coming from. I don't know what your life is. I don't know whether it's all good or whether it's all struggle or a little bit of everything. I will say this, the fact you're in this house today tells me that you're moving in the right direction. And you have handholds. I heard about a Black Hawk, and this is a true story, that crashed in the sea. I think it was a Coast Guard or maybe a Navy, and it was underwater, and the pilot got out, and he said the reason he got out, he couldn't see anything underwater, and it was dark and black, but he said, but I remembered the handholds that would get me out. He knew the way out. Well, Jesus said, don't be afraid. Now, you know what I'm convinced happened in that moment? Their fear left them. Now, had the wind ceased yet? Nope. Had the threat ceased yet? Nope. Had the darkness gone away? Nope. What I want us to see is this. Sometimes when we trust God and we pray and we seek Him and when we really cast our cares on Him and our fears and our anxiety, just like these guys had, the Lord will calm the storm in us before He calms the storm around us. There was a storm going on around them. He hadn't calmed it yet. That was to come later when He got in the boat. But He calmed the storm in them. Now, I pray when the storm's going on around me, I'm praying, Lord, get rid of that storm. And that's nothing wrong with praying that either. When we were at Fort Bragg, we were trying to serve the Lord. All of a sudden, Donna goes to the dermatologist, and the dermatologist at Womack Army Hospital says, I don't like the looks of that on your back. Next thing we know, we found out it was melanoma. Until we heard all the biopsy results and we heard about what that may lead to, we had a storm going on around us. But our trust was in Him. So the storm was going on around us, but Jesus had calmed the storm in us. You may have a storm going on around you. You may need to, and I'll join you in praying that the storm will end if it would benefit God's plan for your life. But I'll definitely pray the storm within you will cease. That's one of our greatest witnesses to the world. Because we live in the same world everybody else lives in. But when we live that victorious life by faith and people realize, well, wait a minute, How can you have the joy that you have? How can you have the peace that you have? How can you look at things the way you do? I love what Peter said, always be ready to give an answer to the person who asks the reason for your hope. We get to live as hopeful people. So let me close with this. Now, Gigi will tell you, and the folks at First Baptist Charlottesville will tell you, when Joel says in conclusion, I'm just getting started. But this is in conclusion. I'm going to close with this. When I was at the Pentagon, I conducted the very first memorial services up there for personnel who died, and that's in the book I wrote. That's why I did that 20th anniversary thing. I didn't want those folks to be forgotten. But anyway, I did the first one was for Lieutenant Colonel Jerry Dickerson, Sergeant First Class Model in White. I did it in the Pentagon Auditorium on September 25th, 2 weeks to the day after the event. Did another one 2 days later. Well, I was a mobilized reservist, but I was given the assignment of being the Deputy Pentagon Chaplain for several months. And so the Pentagon Chaplain told me, he said, I can't do it. My plate's too full. You got it. So we did. But another job I had at the Pentagon during that period was I was assigned to a critical incident stress debriefing team. Some of you know what that is. If you've ever been in law enforcement or EMS or rescue, we use a lot of that in first responders because they deal with a lot of trauma. Our son-in-law is a volunteer fireman and a policeman. I have 2 nephews that are policemen in Greenville, South Carolina. One of them was shot in the line of duty. So they deal with a lot of trauma. But at the Pentagon, we were working in this critical incident stress debriefing team, and I was assigned to it. They had a chaplain, they had a social worker, they had a psychiatrist. And we would meet with small groups of people who shared the event at the same time and shared the same experience. Some people in the building hardly even knew the building had been hit. It's so big. Others were traumatized. They heard friends dying even. I had one of the Puerto Rican maids come in. She didn't speak English, but through an interpreter, she told me through her tears, her best friend died and was trapped and was crying to her, save me, and she couldn't. So there was a lot of people that had a terrible trauma. But this particular group of critical incident stress debriefing we were doing, there was 13 people in that group. One of them was a general officer, and there were several civilians. They were part of a team that was on that end of the Pentagon that got hit. Well, after the buildings in New York had been hit, everybody was, thinking, okay, we're at war. Well, they had just dismissed their meeting, and the only one of their group that had gotten out of the office complex that they were in was this master sergeant. And he had gotten out into the hall. Well, when the plane hit, it threw him further down the hall. It threw him clear. So he did what he was supposed to do. He did what I was told to do when I was there. You go to your rally point so we kind of figure out who's where. Well, obviously, none of his team went to the rally point. He was the only one. So he knew they were still in the building. Well, unbeknown to him at that moment, the other 12, I heard every one of them say this. They said it in my presence. Every one of them said they knew they were going to die. Because once the plane hit, the building immediately filled with black, acrid smoke. And they said you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And the heat was incredible all around them. So these 12 all reconciled themselves. I'm going to die. This is where I'm going to die. And so this master sergeant decided to go back in and try to see if he could get some of them out. Well, in the Pentagon, you have these fire points where you can break a glass and get an axe, or break a glass and get a fire extinguisher, or break a glass and get a flashlight. Well, he got a flashlight. And he started crawling back in the way he'd come out, and he crawled as far as he could. Couldn't see anything. He couldn't see anything either. But he began to call out, "Can you hear my voice?" And those in the room could hear him. And they replied, "We hear you." And this is what he said. He said, "Get down on your hands and knees and crawl towards my voice." And he started calling them out. But then he did something else that as a chaplain and as a pastor, I guess really struck me. He had that flashlight with him. And then he said, "Follow my voice, come to my voice." But then he said, "Come to the light. Come to the light." Well, I think it probably took them a little while before they could see even the light that was burning. But I thought, that's what it's all about. That's my life purpose. You're either a missionary or a mission field. I'm either a missionary or a mission field. If I know Him, then that's my life purpose. To let my light so shine before others that they will do what? Glorify God. They'll seek Him. So that's my mission the rest of my life, is to put that light out there, that spiritual light of Christ through me, and say, come this way. Come to Him. Come to the light.